Benghazi was President Obama's red phone moment, and he failed, abjectly. What we know now is enough to decipher the fact that President Obama was negligent in the run-up to the attack, did nothing to help our people on the ground during the attack, and afterwards decided not to tell the truth to the American people about something that was absolutely critical to be open and honest with. Didn't do it. But it would be wrong to think of Benghazi as a single incident. We have to look at it as a broader issue because it has tremendous impact on how we should view President Obama's foreign policy, how he views his role as commander-in-chief, what he would do with 4 more years. Why was he so afraid of telling the truth about Benghazi? Yes, it was a debacle, it was a disgrace, it was a tragedy. We know all of that. But it also began to show people the truth of what's happening in the Middle East. We're facing a dangerous world ahead, and it's not one in which trying to appease our enemies and seeking a meeker, milder role for the United States is going to be anything that is of help to us. The world is going to be getting more dangerous ahead, and Barack Obama has shown himself to be someone who fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the enemy and does not understand the character, the threat that we actually face. Glenn, I know you've assembled some experts, some of my favorite people on this issue to talk about it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to turn it to you. We've seen eye to eye on Benghazi from the beginning.
Yeah, I have General Boykin here. We also have Lieutenant Colonel Bill Cowan and Representative Louis Gohmert. Here comes Congressman Gohmert. Let's just talk a little bit about Benghazi and what it means if America chooses to ignore what's just happened and they decide, you know what, our commander-in-chief is good. What happens? Anybody? Bill?
Well,
intelligence.
I mean, first off, there's going to be people in the Democratic side that argue our commander-in-chief did fine, and they're trying to make that argument anyway. But as former military guys, particularly people who've run in sensitive operations and arenas before, we're very aware of how this administration, this president, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and to some degree the CIA totally failed us. And every mother and father out there, brother, sister, aunt, uncle who has a relative in the military or a child who may be in the military at some point needs to look at this and think, hey, those 2 SEALs who were killed could have been my own children. The ambassador could have been my child, my brother, my this, my that. The reality is if the president wins, we're never going to have a good scrub of this, Glenn. If the president loses, we have to hope.
Tell me what it means, though, to, I mean, as I see, you know, one of our SEALs up on the roof of this CIA compound, and he's got a laser and he can paint the enemies. I know that we can send a jet, a fighter, and just knock the wind out of them. I know we can send an armed drone. And I see this guy up there volunteering, coming in and fighting, having him on the comm and being told, stand down, and then we watch him die. We watch him being killed. I don't think, that's not my country. Do we do this? This isn't what we do as a general.
No, in 1978 we created the Delta Force, and in 1980 we created SEAL Team 6 to be able to respond
so let me just
to
put
these
this into perspective.
activities.
Hang on just a second. When you say we, you were actually one of the founding members of Delta Force.
I was one of the founding members,
okay.
And they were created to be able to respond to these kinds of incidents. And then in those events where they were not available, there were similar forces created in each theater. So there were forces in the European theater that could have been deployed. First of all, the 6th Fleet was sitting out in the Mediterranean. Marines were on Sigonella. Glenn, the question that needs to be asked of this administration is, why didn't you put boots on the ground? And the excuse that they couldn't get there in time is not acceptable. Right. Because you put boots on the ground to save American lives, even if it turns out to be a recovery of bodies, you put boots on the ground.
Congressman, I have been, I can't tell you how many sources that we have on this. Gun running is, everybody is telling me it was a gun running deal. And also that people who don't agree with me politically are coming out and saying this is, at best, mass incompetence from this administration.
It's horrible, but it actually is very consistent with everything this president's done. And it is a bit of a throwback to the Carter administration. And General Boykin and I talked about it because he was on that failed rescue attempt. And he knew there were 8 choppers that went in. What I was told back 30 years ago by a guy that helped plan was they at first, when Carter wanted a plan, He said send in 12. They said send in 12 choppers because you got to have 6 for the mission to go. And Carter said no, that'll look like an invasion. Scale it back to 8. They said we got turbine engines. We may lose 50%. He said do 8. We're not doing 12. It'll look like an invasion. They go with 8. Only 5 get there. And as General Boykin told me, they just knew when they got to the staging area, if they only had 5 or less, it was abort. So
you were there.
This goes back to that same kind of thinking. Instead of the thinking like you and I grew up believing for America, all of us, that we do whatever it takes. You had a President Carter and even more incompetence in this president that doesn't feel that way. And let me tell you, I was in West Africa a couple of years ago, and an elderly West African, a Christian man, said he wanted to tell me something. He said, look, we were so excited when you elected a black president, but since then we have seen your country go weak and get weaker and weaker. And he said, you have got to send a message. Tell the people in Washington, if you see the president, tell him, stop growing weak. Our only chance for peace in this life is if you stay strong. And the whole world, what they're seeing is consistency. This president has put rules of engagement so that they send a SEAL team instead of a drone into a hot area a year ago, August, and we lose so many of SEAL Team 6. And why? Because the flag officer that briefed the immediate families told them, because we're trying to win their hearts and minds. Win their hearts and minds, my foot. When you're at war, you send in the military to kick rears and take names, and you don't send them in to win hearts and minds.
Amy.
Congressman, I had a question for you about investigating the events of September 11th. And my question is, if Mitt Romney wins tonight and becomes the next president of the United States, do you think he should conduct a public investigation of the events of September 11th, rather?
I am
what
so
happened?
glad you asked that question.
Hell
because
yes.
I have a fear that because Mitt Romney is such a nice guy, he really is a nice guy, that he may want to do what President Bush did. And I love President Bush. He's a lot smarter than people think a lot of people thought he was. He's a brilliant guy. But President Bush comes in and goes, you know, all that stuff that happened before bygones, we're not going to address any of that. But I'm telling you what, there is so much that is soured and sick right now that needs to be cleaned out and cleansed and have sunlight shed on it.
I don't think
this president cannot come in and do that. We have got to clean these things out.
I think one of the biggest mistakes we ever made in the 1970s was Ford let Nixon be pardoned. The best thing we can do for the United States of America, quite honestly, I think, is if we had that over to do again, you put Nixon behind bars. If nobody is above, no one is above the law.
That's a great point.
How do we get our military back if we don't expose this and root this evil out?
Congressman just said when something happens, the American military does what it takes to get it taken care of. In this case, the American military failed miserably. It wasn't our troops on the ground who failed. Right. It was the leadership in the Pentagon. And the notion that we can wait hours and hours and hours, Secretary Panetta was just the mouthpiece for what the military was telling him, that we don't put people on the ground until we know what the situation is. That's total
I don't believe that.
BS,
Do you
Glenn.
believe that?
That is absolute nonsense. When the people are getting killed, you put people on the ground. You do all you can.
I've never met a military man who wants to go to war, but I also have never met one that says, leave him behind. Not one, ever.
There is an ethos in the military, and that ethos was violated in this situation. And that ethos says, I'll never leave a fallen comrade. And that's what we did.
Well, let me throw this in, why this is so consistent with this president. Now, I heard some of our best conservative leaders around the country, media folks say, well, you know, when the captain of the Bainbridge was captured, this president, we got to give it to him, he did that right. Well, I talked to some of the SEALs who said, you know, the truth is he gave an order that we were never to use deadly force unless the life of the captain was in immediate danger of being taken. And that actually they acted. I said, well, why didn't you shoot when the captain jumped out of the boat? You had clear shots. That surely was giving you a clear shot. They said we had clear shots for 3 days, but the president's orders kept us from doing it, and they got a big rear chewing after they did, because they said we were going to work this out without any violence. We were going to have a peaceful. This is not the way a commander-in-chief should do business.
Real quick, I've got to go to break.
You asked what do we do to make sure these kinds of things don't happen again. We start firing people, and I suggest start with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who's the ultimate military man in charge of what happened in Benghazi, and make our way down from there, Glenn. If we don't go in and start clearing the decks of some military people, we're never going to get where we need to be.
It's a cancer that's it's in the administration, it's in the State Department, it's in the CIA, and it's in our military, and it's frightening. The only thing Americans believe in, I think anymore, the only institution of our government the Americans believe in is military. And the minute the military starts to go awry, we're in trouble.
Right. Thanks.
Got to clean out the
guys.
cancer.
All right. We have polls that are closing right now. We're going to come back here throughout the night. We're just going to roll through it until there is a clear winner. The results are coming in fast and furious now, to coin a phrase, and we'll have the results for you in real time. We'll do that now at The Blaze.